Everyone in Obsidian knows the rules. When Theron Vane walks through the door, you find something to do somewhere else. You study the floor, the wall, the tablecloth, the inside of your own skull, whatever keeps your eyes down. You do not make eye contact. You do not linger near his table. You do not smile at him like he's a regular customer, because Theron Vane is not a regular customer, and pretending otherwise gets you fired at best, and at worst, well, the bartender who'd mixed his order wrong on a Tuesday in March hadn't shown up for his shift the following Wednesday, or any Wednesday since. The staff at Obsidian had their own name for the man, the North Star, not because he guided anyone, because when he was in the room, everyone orbited the space he wasn't standing in. Ada Stern had been working there for 11 days. She didn't know the shorthand yet. Nobody had thought to tell the new girl. The reservation was for two, Theron Vane and one guest. When they arrived, the man in the charcoal suit and the small girl in the birthday dress, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, clutching a velvet ribbon from some earlier celebration, every server on the floor made a quiet, practiced pivot to the opposite side of the restaurant. Every server except Ada, who was already crossing the room with a tray of water glasses and had nowhere graceful to redirect herself without spilling everything. She set down the water glasses at table 14. She did not look at Theron Vane's face. She looked at the little girl. The little girl was named Gwen. Ada didn't know that yet. What Ada could see from 8 feet away was that the child had ordered the filet mignon, her birthday dinner, clearly, and had taken one too large bite of it about 45 seconds ago. And for the past 15 of those 45 seconds, Gwen had not been breathing. No sound. That was the thing that made it different from normal choking. No coughing, no gagging, just a child going very still and very pale while her small hands pressed flat against the table and her eyes went wide with a terror she didn't have the air to name. Every person in Obsidian saw it happen. Not one of them moved. Theron Vane's men, 3 of them stationed at the bar, 2 near the entrance, turned to stone. The manager, Raymond Schock, stood halfway between the kitchen and the dining room, with a look on his face like a man watching a car accident through glass. The sommelier took one step forward and stopped. Ada Stern dropped her tray. The sound of breaking glass cracked across the room like a starter pistol. She was already moving, already around the table, already behind the child's chair, with her hands locked together below Gwen's ribs before anyone had processed what was happening. 1 thrust. 2. The chunk of steak hit the white tablecloth on the 3rd. Gwen gasped, a raw, desperate sound, like something being pulled back from a very dark edge. Then she started crying, the way children cry when the fear finally finds its voice. Ada crouched in front of her, both hands on the girl's face. "You're okay," Ada said, low, steady. The voice of someone who had learned long ago that panic was a luxury other people got to have. "You're breathing. I've got you. Look at me. Just breathe." Gwen looked at her, breathed. The room was so silent that the candles seemed loud. Theron Vane sat at the head of the table and looked at Ada Stern with an expression that none of his men, in a combined 47 years of working for the man, had ever seen on his face before. It was not gratitude. It was something older and more complicated than gratitude, the look of someone who has been carrying a weight so long they have forgotten what their own hands feel like, empty, and someone just, without asking, lifted a corner of it. He said nothing. Ada checked Gwen's color, checked her breathing once more, and then stood up. She looked at Theron Vane for exactly 1 second, because she still didn't know who he was, and said she should have some water, small sips. Then she went to get a broom for the broken glasses. To understand why Ada Stern didn't freeze when everyone else did, you have to understand where she came from. And where she came from was the kind of place that doesn't appear on anyone's highlight reel. She'd been 9 years old when the highway pileup happened. 11 cars in the fog on I-94, just south of Gary, Indiana. Her parents were in the 4th one. The social worker who came to the hospital the next morning had kind eyes and a clipboard, and Ada had understood, with the particular clarity that devastation sometimes produces in children, that her life had just divided itself into 2 completely separate halves. What followed were 7 foster homes across Illinois, 7 different sets of rules, 7 different schools, 7 different kitchens where she learned to move quietly and eat quickly, and never ever ask for more than was already being offered. She learned to read a room before she stepped into it. She learned which adults meant the things they said and which ones were just filling silence. She learned that invisibility was not a failure, it was a skill, the most useful one she had. By the time she aged out of the system at 18, Ada Stern could assess a stranger's emotional state in under 4 seconds. She could tell a genuine smile from a performed one at 20 paces. She could find the exit of any building within 30 seconds of entering it. Not because she'd ever been taught to, but because every instinct she owned had been trained on the question of where do I go if this goes wrong. She'd also taken a first aid course at the YMCA when she was 16, because one of the foster families had a grandfather with a heart condition, and Ada had decided that knowing what to do was better than standing there helpless. That course had covered the Heimlich maneuver in its 3rd session. She was 23 now. She worked the morning shift at a laundromat on Milwaukee Avenue and the evening shift at Obsidian. She rented a single room in a boarding house in Wicker Park. Radiator that clanked, window that didn't quite seal, a shared bathroom with 3 other tenants. She had $1,700 saved toward a used Honda Civic that would let her get to Loyola's nursing program, without taking 3 buses each way. She had no idea that the man she'd spoken to at table 12 was Theron Vane, the man who controlled the movement of more money, contraband, and political influence across Chicago than the last 2 city administrations combined. She found out the next day when her manager, Raymond Chalk, called her into his office and closed the door with the particular carefulness of a man who is very afraid. "Last night," Raymond said, table 12. "The little girl was choking," Ada said. "I helped her." "Yes." Raymond looked at the closed door, then back at her. "Mr. Vane would like to speak with you." "Who's Mr. Vane?" Raymond Chalk stared at her for a long moment. "The man at table 12. "Okay," Ada said. "When?" "Now," Raymond said. "He's in the private dining room." The private dining room at Obsidian was paneled in dark walnut and lit by a single chandelier. Theron Vane sat at the center of the long table with a cup of coffee and no entourage. That was the first thing Ada noticed, the absence of the men she'd seen the previous night. He'd come alone, or sent everyone else away, which she would later understand was the same thing. She registered with the objectivity of assessing a situation, extremely composed. Not still the way calm people are still the way pressure is still, a stillness that has force behind it, direction, the sense of something being very deliberately contained. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "You saved my niece's life." Ada considered this. "I helped her when she was choking. She did the breathing herself." Something moved at the corner of Theron Vane's mouth. Not quite a smile. "What's your name?" "Ada Stern." "How long have you worked here, Ada Stern?" 11 days. "Where did you learn to do that?" "First aid course. I was 16. He looked at her the way she'd seen very few people look at anything, completely, without calculation, the way you look at something when you're not yet decided what it means. "You weren't afraid," he said. It was not a compliment. It was an observation that seemed to be troubling him slightly. "I was afraid," Ada said. "I just couldn't let that stop me." She was turning blue. Theron Vane was quiet for a moment. Outside the door, she could hear the faint sound of the restaurant opening for lunch service, glasses being set down, the distant percussion of a kitchen in preparation. "Is there anything you need?" he asked finally. The question was loaded in a way she didn't fully understand yet. In his world, "is there anything you need" was a currency exchange, an opening of accounts. Ada thought about the Honda Civic, thought about the 3-bus commute to Loyola, thought about $1,700 saved over 14 months of double shifts and bought day-old bread and shoes she'd resoled twice. "No," she said, "I'm fine." That answer, Raymond Chalk would tell her later, with something between awe and genuine bewilderment, was the most startling thing Theron Vane had heard in 11 years of people wanting things from him. He came back the following week, and the week after that. always to Obsidian, always in the evening, during Ada's shift. Never with Gwen. Ada understood, without being told, that Gwen's presence at the first dinner had been a rare thing, a birthday exception, the man allowing something soft to exist in a space that was otherwise all edges. He did not bring that softness back into the restaurant. He kept it somewhere she couldn't see. But he kept coming back to where Ada was. He started asking for her section specifically. The other servers knew better than to contest this. Ada herself didn't entirely know what to make of it, so she did what she always did with information she hadn't yet sorted. She filed it and kept moving. He asked her questions the way he apparently did everything, without preamble and without apology. Where are you from? Everywhere. Foster system. What are you saving for? A car and nursing school. You have no family? No. Does that bother you? She'd looked at him across the table where he sat with a glass of scotch he rarely finished and said, I stopped being bothered by things I can't change when I was about 12. He'd looked at her for a long moment after that. How old are you? 23. You talk like someone who's been 23 for about 40 years. I've been told. His lieutenants. She'd learned their names by now. Felix Dre and Oren Cass, who stationed themselves near the bar when Theron came in, watched her with the vigilance of men, trying to understand a variable that doesn't fit their model. She was not afraid of Theron Vane. She was not performing fearlessness. She genuinely, functionally, moved through the same emotional register whether she was serving him or serving the couple in the corner, celebrating their anniversary. This appeared to disturb them greatly. It appeared to fascinate Theron Vane. She didn't understand why until the night she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear. It was a Thursday. Late, the dining room had emptied out except for Theron's table and a party of 4 near the window who were still on dessert. Ada was restocking the service station near the hallway that led to Obsidian's 2 private rooms, the Walnut Room and the smaller Cedar Room, which was almost never used. The Cedar Room door was not entirely closed. Told you what the situation is, a voice said, low and careful. Not Theron. Someone else. The Prelly people are moving on the Fulton corridor. They've got people inside, Theron. Inside. You understand what I'm saying? Theron's voice then unmistakable. Who? I don't have a name yet. I have a face. The meeting happened at the Fulton warehouse 3 nights ago. Whoever it is, they knew the secondary alarm codes. They walked in like they owned it. Secondary codes, a pause, that's 7 people. 6, Santiago's been in Florida since November. The silence that followed had weight to it. Ada became very aware of the fact that she was standing completely still in a hallway, holding a stack of cocktail napkins. She should have moved. Every instinct she had said move. Instead, she stood there 1 second too long, and the Cedar Room door opened, and Felix Dre stepped out and looked directly at her. He was very still for a moment. Then he reached back into the room and said quietly, We have a problem. Theron Vane stepped into the hallway. He looked at Ada. She looked back at him. The cocktail napkins were still in her hands. How long have you been standing there? He said. Long enough, she said. Because lying to him felt more dangerous than the truth. And she'd learned a long time ago that honest was the only language that didn't require a good memory to maintain. He studied her for a long moment. Oren Cassie had appeared at the end of the hallway, hand inside his jacket. Theron raised 2 fingers. The hand came back out. Finish your shift, Theron said. Don't leave through the back tonight. It was not a threat, it was, she realized, a warning. The distinction mattered. They were waiting for her anyway. 2 of them in a car outside the boarding house on Wicker Park. She saw them from half a block away, not because they were obvious, but because Ada Stern had been reading rooms and exits since she was 9 years old, and a car with 2 people in it sitting dark and still at 11:45 at night on a residential street was a room she had been trained to read. She kept walking, went past the boarding house, found a diner 3 blocks over that was still open, and sat in a booth near the window with a cup of coffee and her phone and thought about her options. The options were not good. 40 minutes later, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't have saved. She answered it. Where are you? Theron Vane said. She told him. He said nothing for a moment, then, "Don't move." She didn't. She drank her coffee. The diner played something low and country on the radio. The cook in the back was singing along, slightly off-key. Ada watched the street and thought about the 11 years of her life she'd spent making herself small enough that no one would bother to notice her, and how efficiently that strategy had just failed. The black SUV pulled up outside 12 minutes later. Felix Dre came in, scanned the room, nodded once at her. She picked up her bag and left with him. Theron was in the car. He did not look surprised to see her, which she was coming to understand was his default condition. He absorbed information without advertising his reaction to it, filed it somewhere behind those dark, measured eyes, and gave you back only what he'd decided you needed to see. "Who were they?" she asked, because sitting in silence felt like a waste of time. "People who want me to think you're a vulnerability." He looked out the window. The city moved past them, lit up and indifferent. People who've been trying to find one for a while. "And am I?" He turned to look at her then. "Not yet," he said. "That depends on what you do next." She understood what he was telling her. She was at a fork. One road led away from Theron Vane and everything associated with him. New job, new neighborhood, invisible again, which she was good at. The other road led somewhere she couldn't entirely see from here. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Nothing. Not right now," he paused. "I need you somewhere they can't use you." That was how Ada Stern ended up in a brownstone in Lincoln Park, with a guest room on the second floor that was larger than her entire apartment in Wicker Park, 2 guards outside who knew her face, and Theron Vane 2 floors above her, working until 3 in the morning on things she was not supposed to understand. She understood more than he expected. That became apparent quickly. The brownstone was not his home, or it was in the same way that a command post is a home. Functional, controlled. The furniture was expensive and impersonal, chosen by someone with taste and no particular affection. There were no photographs except one on the desk in the second-floor study. Small girl, birthday dress, velvet ribbon. Ada had seen it through the open door and not mentioned it. They existed in the brownstone in a careful, circling proximity. She cooked sometimes, because the alternative was protein bars from the kitchen pantry, and she found cooking settled her nerves. He ate what she made without comment, which she decided to interpret as approval. He came home late with a controlled expression that occasionally, at the edges, showed the strain beneath it. She didn't ask about the strain. She made coffee and left a cup on the counter and went back to whatever she was reading. One night, very late, she found him in the kitchen instead of the study. He was standing at the window with a glass of water, looking out at the small, dark garden behind the brownstone. His jacket was over a chair, his shirt was untucked. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like a person who was tired. "Can't sleep?" she asked, because the alternative was going back upstairs and pretending she hadn't seen him look human. "Gwen has a parent-teacher conference tomorrow," he said. "I don't know how to do those." Ada sat down at the kitchen table. "What don't you know how to do?" "Convince someone that I am the appropriate adult in that child's life." He said it without inflection, which was the most honest thing she'd heard him say. No performance in it. Just the fact, stripped down. "You saved her," Ada said. "When her mother died, you took her." "I run a criminal organization," he said. "I know exactly what I am. The question is whether her third-grade teacher knows it, and what happens if she finds out." Ada was quiet for a moment. "My third-grade teacher was a woman named Mrs. Cowell. She wore cardigans and smelled like cedar chips. She was the first adult in my life who looked at me, really looked like she was actually trying to see me, and said I was going to be okay." She paused. "She didn't know the first thing about my home situation. She just showed up and paid attention. That was enough." Theron looked at her across the kitchen. "Show up," Ada said. "Pay attention. That's the whole job." He was quiet for a long moment. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Simple isn't the same as easy." He sat down across from her then, which surprised her, set his water glass on the table. In the overhead light, she could see lines at the corners of his eyes she hadn't noticed before, and a scar along his jaw that his beard nearly covered. He looked like a man who had been building something for a very long time, and had stopped, somewhere along the way, remembering why he started. "I've done things," he said. Not a confession, more like a fact he was setting on the table between them to see what she did with it. Things that don't get undone. "I know," she said. "And you're still sitting in my kitchen at 2 in the morning. "I'm sitting in your kitchen," Ada said, "because a week ago, nobody in a room full of people would move to help a child who was suffocating. And you were the most powerful person in that room, and you still couldn't stop what was happening." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not here because you're good. I'm here because you love that little girl, and that means something. I don't know yet exactly what, but it means something." He looked at her for a long time after that. She held his gaze the same way she always did, not as a challenge, but as a simple refusal to look away from the truth of a thing. "Get some sleep," he said finally. She stood. "You too." He almost smiled at that, almost. If you've been listening to this story, really listening, then you already know what's coming. Because Theron Vane has 6 people who know those secondary alarm codes, and Ada Stern, without trying, has become the only person in his world who sees him clearly. That makes her valuable. It also makes her a target in ways she is only beginning to understand. Don't go anywhere. Because what happens next is the moment everything changes, and I need you to be here for it. Subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library if you haven't already, and make sure your notifications are on. The next part of this story is the one you'll want to tell someone about. She found the name by accident, the same way she found most things, by being quiet in rooms where people forgot she existed. It was Felix Dre. She didn't want it to be Felix Dre. Felix was the one who'd come into the diner and brought her to the car. Felix was the one who nodded at her in the hallway like she was worth acknowledging, which in the ecosystem of Theron Vane's operations was a meaningful gesture. But Felix was also the one who'd been in that cedar room when the secondary alarm codes were discussed. And Felix was the one whose phone she'd seen open on the kitchen counter at 6 in the morning, a number in the recent calls she recognized because she had an exceptional memory for sequences, and that number matched one she'd seen scrawled on a notepad in the hallway outside the cedar room the night she'd stood too long with the cocktail napkins. She didn't go to Theron immediately. She thought about it for 2 days. She followed the thread the only way she knew how, by being invisible and attentive and patient, by listening in doorways and noticing what was on desks and remembering things that no one expected her to remember. By the end of the second day, she had 3 things: the phone number, a meeting time she'd overheard Felix confirming in the garage, and a name she'd caught once, half-spoken, Prelly, the way Theron had said it in the hallway. She laid them out on the desk in Theron's study while he was in it, put them down in front of him the way she'd once put a water glass in front of a man who'd just watched his niece almost die. Practical, deliberate, no ceremony. "Felix Dre," she said. Theron looked at the information. He did not move. His face did the thing it did when he was processing something that mattered, went completely still, like water just before it freezes. "How did you get this?" he said. "The same way I get everything," Ada said. "Nobody notices me." Silence. Long enough that she started to wonder if she'd miscalculated something. Then Theron Vane looked up at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, and it took her a moment to identify it because she'd seen it so rarely in her life. It was the look of being known, of having someone see exactly what you are and not flinch from it. "You could have left," he said, used the chaos, walked out and disappeared. "I'm tired of disappearing," Ada Stern said. "I've been doing it since I was 9. Felix Dre was gone within 48 hours. No announcement, no visible consequence. Just gone. The way things in Theron Vane's world went when they stopped being useful and started being dangerous. The Prelly operation collapsed 3 weeks later. The how and why of that collapse were not things Ada asked about, and Theron did not explain. What she understood was the result. The threat to her diminished. She moved back to Wicker Park. She finished saving for the Honda Civic. She enrolled in the nursing program. But she still came to Obsidian on Friday nights. Not to work. Theron had arranged, without being asked, that she wouldn't need to. She came because it was the room where everything had changed, and she was still working out what exactly it had changed into. He was always at the corner table, always waiting for her to arrive, though he would never have called it waiting. He called it his standing reservation. She called it the same thing, because they had both learned, in their very different ways, to call things what they were without dressing them up. Gwen came sometimes. She had decided that Ada was her favorite person in the building, which she communicated primarily through drawing Ada pictures on the backs of cocktail napkins and presenting them with enormous seriousness. Ada kept every one of them. On a Friday in November, almost 5 months after the night, she'd dropped a tray of water glasses and changed the direction of her life. Ada sat down at the corner table, across from Theron Vane, and Gwen climbed immediately into her lap and fell asleep with the specific bonelessness of a tired 7-year-old. Theron watched this without expression, which by now she knew meant he was feeling something he hadn't decided what to do with yet. "The parent-teacher conference," Ada said quietly, so as not to wake Gwen. "Mrs. Okafor," Theron said. He paused. "She said Gwen is exceptional, kind. She said Gwen talks about her uncle constantly." "What does she say?" "Apparently that I make very good pancakes." He looked slightly affronted by this, as though the pancakes were the least interesting thing about him, which Ada found difficult not to find funny. "And that I read to her every night." "Do you?" "Yes." Ada looked down at Gwen's sleeping face, the velvet ribbon from her coat unraveling slightly across Ada's sleeve. Looked back up at Theron Vane, who was watching her with that steady, unguarded attention he reserved for things he was still deciding the meaning of. "Mrs. Okafor said she thinks Gwen is going to be okay," he said, low, like the admission cost him something. She said it like it was a small thing. "It's not a small thing," Ada said. "No," Theron Vane agreed, "it's not." The restaurant hummed around them, the low music, the clink of glasses, the quiet theater of a Friday night in a room where dangerous men made decisions and the staff knew the rules, and everything operated inside an order that Theron had built and maintained through a combination of intelligence and violence and something Ada had come to believe closer to desperation than anyone who feared him would ever guess. He wasn't who she would have chosen if choosing had been on the table. He was not good. He knew it. And she knew, and they had both decided, somewhere in the past 5 months, to stop pretending that knowing it changed anything. He was also the man who read to a 7-year-old every night, who had sat in a kitchen at 2 a.m. and said, "I've done things," and let the sentence sit there without trying to make it smaller, who had looked at Ada Stern, the girl nobody noticed, and noticed her with the complete unguarded attentions of someone who had stopped trying to calculate what noticing would cost him. "You should know," he said, "that the staff have started calling you something." Ada raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "They call you the woman who stayed." He said it matter-of-factly, the way he said everything. No softening, no performance, just the fact of it, as opposed to everyone else who left. Ada thought about that, about the 9-year-old in the hospital with the kind-eyed social worker and the clipboard, about 7 foster homes and 11 days at a new job and a tray of water glasses hitting the floor, about the specific strange logic of a life that had been training her, without her knowledge, for exactly this moment. "I'm not staying for the title," she said. "I know," Theron Vane said. "That's the only reason it matters." Gwen shifted in Ada's lap, chasing something in her sleep. Outside, Chicago carried on, loud and cold and bright and indifferent the way cities always are, not caring what gets decided inside the rooms within them. But inside that corner table at Obsidian, something settled, not loudly, not with ceremony, the way real things usually settle, quietly and without asking permission. The girl who had spent her whole life learning to disappear had finally stopped. And the most dangerous man in Chicago had, for the first time in longer than he would say, stopped wanting her to. If that last moment between Ada and Theron just landed somewhere in your chest, you already know this story isn't finished. 2 broken people finding steady ground is just the beginning, and what comes next is going to test everything they've just built. Hit that like button if you were rooting for Ada from the moment she dropped that tray. Subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library and turn on your notifications, because we're just getting started with these two. And I have to ask, what was the moment you knew Ada was different? Was it when she stepped forward while everyone else froze? When she handed Theron the evidence without asking for anything in return? Or was it that quiet kitchen at 2 in the morning, when she told a dangerous man to just show up? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, and your answer will tell me exactly what to write next.